When the prince expelled a poor young woman, she whispered, "You have no idea what you've done." The salt air rose from the sea in damp threads, curling through the half-rotted window shutters of the cottage. Lucia Bartolini stirred from the hard cot pressed against the stone wall. Her fingers curled in the thin blanket, still tangled in the remnant of a dream she could no longer grasp. Outside, the tide whispered against the rocks, and the muffled bleating of goats filtered in from the distant hillside. She sat up slowly, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek, already feeling the ache of another day beginning. The cottage stood at the farthest edge of the village, where the earth dropped sharply into the cliffs above the Bay of Naples. It had once been whitewashed, though most of the lime had flaked away over the years. The roof sagged in the corner where a storm had torn away the tiles last spring, and the floor, dirt packed firm by decades of footsteps, was cold even in summer. But it was hers. It was the last place her mother had ever smiled. Lucia moved through the morning with quiet efficiency, feeding the hens and washing her face at the rain basin outside. The water was cool, startling against her skin. She kept her thick brown hair braided, coiling it into a knot beneath a simple linen scarf. Her dress was faded blue wool, the color long leached out by sea wind and sunlight, but the seams were straight, and the hem had been let down twice in the last year. She walked into the village by foot, carrying a small bundle of embroidered cloths wrapped in muslin, work for the parish priest. The children, waiting outside the chapel for their morning lessons, brightened at the sight of her. She smiled at them, softly, only briefly. It was enough. She had always belonged on the edge of things, never quite inside the circle of village life. Her mother, gentle and mysterious, had been a source of both fascination and suspicion. A woman with formal Italian diction, a pearl-studded comb no peasant could afford, and a stubborn silence about her past. Lucia had grown up beneath that shadow, respected but never embraced. By midday, the sky had turned the pale color of tin, and the smell of the wind changed, sharper now, tinged with ash and something foreign. Horses' hooves struck the stones of the main road. Lucia was standing in the chapel's small vestibule, hands dusted with chalk, when she heard the first murmurs ripple through the town square. Carriages, soldiers, a banner. She stepped outside just as the crowd began to gather. Men in livery bearing the crest of Naples dismounted with stiff precision. Behind them came a gilded coach trimmed in black velvet and bronze. The village mayor, old, stooped, and nearly voiceless, hurried to meet them, cap in hand. One of the guards unfurled a parchment and began to read. By order of His Royal Highness, Prince Alessio di Calderari, acting in full authority on behalf of the Ducal Council of Naples, all tenants residing on the coastal ridge of the Porticello settlement are to vacate their dwellings within 2 days' time. The land is to be requisitioned for a military port, effective immediately. Gasps spread through the crowd. Someone wept. A woman cried out the name of her father's vineyard. Lucia stood motionless. She could hear the blood in her ears. Bartolini, Lucia. The name rang in the air like a cracked bell. One of the soldiers approached her, his boots grinding into the packed dirt. You are to surrender your dwelling today. We are instructed to ensure compliance by dusk. She blinked once. There must be a mistake. No mistake. The man stepped aside. From the open door of the carriage, a figure emerged, tall, impeccably dressed in a black velvet doublet with silver fastenings, his boots spotless despite the dust, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Prince Alessio di Calderari. Lucia had seen portraits in church vestibules, imagined the faces of nobles whose names appeared in missives or sermons, but she had never seen a man like this in flesh. His expression was unreadable, sculpted like marble, cold and impassive beneath the shadow of his plumed hat. His eyes, pale gray and dispassionate, swept the gathering and landed briefly on her. He spoke softly to the man beside him. The orders were confirmed. Lucia walked home in silence. She passed the chapel, the olive grove, the stony path up the hill. Her fingers brushed the faded gate of her cottage one final time. Within minutes they arrived. The soldier stood aside as the prince himself approached. She was at her threshold, her belongings already gathered in a sack beneath the cot, though she had not yet believed she would need them. She looked at him, really looked. He was younger than she'd expected and not as severe, but his stillness made her feel as though she were standing in front of a statue. Lucia Bartolini? Yes. You understand this land has been requisitioned? I do now. Her voice was clear, even as her knees trembled slightly beneath her skirt. He studied her for a second longer. She thought he might speak, offer some justification, some word of decency. He did not. A soldier stepped forward with a rolled parchment. We require you to vacate the premises. Lucia lifted the satchel over her shoulder. With slow, careful movements, she stepped through the doorway of the only home she had ever known. She looked back once. Then she turned to the prince. Her eyes locked on his, steady as stone. You have no idea what you've done, she said. Her voice was soft, not accusing, not angry. But it cut deeper than any scream could have. The words, simple and quiet, unsettled something in him. He said nothing as she walked past him. That night, Lucia slept on the grass outside the chapel, her back to the wall, arms wrapped around her satchel. The villagers avoided her gaze. None approached. The priest offered a blanket, but could not offer her a place to stay. There were eyes everywhere, and no one dared be seen opposing the crown. She did not sleep. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and watchful. Her body ached from the hard ground. She kept her breath slow and even. At dawn, the first rays of light broke through the morning haze, silvering the stone and painting the rooftops in pale gold. Lucia rose and brushed dust from her skirt. She began walking back to her cottage, though there was nothing left inside. She just wanted to stand beneath the fig tree one last time. Inside, behind the hearth, where the plaster had cracked, she kept a worn prayer book belonging to her mother. She opened it with reverence. A small slip of parchment fell from between the pages. She unfolded it slowly. My dear Lucia, if this letter reaches you, I pray it finds you safe. I have written to Donna Agnese Rosamarina, who was my goddaughter long ago. She lives still, a widow now, at a villa near Amalfi. I have told her of you. She has offered to take you in as a companion to her niece. You will be safe there. She remembers me kindly. With all my love, your mother. The ink had faded, but the seal, pressed in rose-colored wax, remained intact. Lucia pressed her thumb to it. She could barely remember the name Agnese, but her mother had spoken of a friend once, a noblewoman who'd written letters in a careful hand and sent gifts when Lucia was small. She stepped out into the courtyard, wind lifting her braid. By late morning, a merchant cart passed through, headed south along the main road towards Salerno and Amalfi. The driver agreed to take her as far as the next town for a few coins. Lucia climbed into the cart, her bundle held tightly in her lap, unaware that the villa she was traveling to was one often visited by Prince Alessio himself. The road curved inland before dipping back toward the sea, each bend offering glimpses of the coastline, coves like cupped hands, cliffs draped in wild rosemary, and the silvery shimmer of waves uncoiling beneath the morning light. Lucia sat in silence on the cart's narrow bench, her satchel tucked between her feet, her fingers curled beneath the edge of her shawl. Every jolt of the wheel rattling over the stone road echoed in her spine. When they rounded the final hilltop, the driver slowed and pointed ahead with a stained finger. There, Villa Rosamarina. The estate lay nestled between olive trees and terraced gardens that sloped toward the sea. It was not a palace, not like the opulent villas of Naples, but its beauty was quiet, rooted. The main house rose in weathered stone, flanked by colonnades where vines curled around balustrades. The facade bore the faded remnants of painted frescoes, angels in mid-flight, cherubs peeking from clouds now chipped with time. Behind the house, the Tyrrhenian sea stretched to the horizon, lit with the gold haze of approaching noon. Lucia stepped down from the cart, her legs unsteady, and walked up the gravel path lined with cypress. A servant appeared to greet her, leading her inside with polite formality. The air shifted the moment she crossed the threshold, cool and fragrant with lavender and old wood. Donna Agnese awaited her in a high-ceilinged drawing room softened by tapestries and light filtered through sheer curtains. She rose slowly from her chair, her movements graceful despite her age. Her gown was brown silk, simply cut but elegant, and her silver hair was pinned beneath a lace veil. "Lucia," she said, her voice a little husky with emotion. "It's like seeing your mother again. The same eyes, the same chin." Lucia bowed her head. "Thank you, Donna Agnese. I'm very grateful to you." The older woman stepped forward and embraced her gently. There was no hesitation in the gesture, no judgment, only warmth. "You'll be safe here, and useful. My niece Bianca is delicate and too often alone. You'll be a companion to her. You'll have your own room, near hers. Modest, but quiet." Lucia swallowed, her throat tight. "That's more than I could ask." She was led through the halls, past rooms hung with portraits in vases of dried roses. The air smelled of lemon oil and sea salt. Her chamber was tucked into the eastern wing, overlooking the orchard. The walls were plastered in a faded peach hue, and the bed was narrow but covered in crisp linens. A wardrobe held a selection of modest gowns in soft colors, garments Bianca had outgrown or no longer wore. Lucia touched the fabric cautiously, unused to such softness. In the days that followed, she settled into a rhythm. Bianca, a sweet, pale girl of 16, warmed to her immediately. They read together in the afternoons or walked the gardens when Bianca's nerves permitted. Lucia kept to herself otherwise, always aware of the fragile ground she stood on. She did not speak of the village. She did not mention Naples. Her heart remained guarded, her pride wrapped in silence. A week passed before the household began to stir with preparations. Bianca's birthday approached, and Donna Agnese had planned a masquerade, a tradition she maintained in memory of her own youth. Carriages arrived bearing guests from Naples, cousins, distant acquaintances, and favored members of the provincial court. Servants bustled through the halls, stringing ribbons, polishing sconces, arranging platters of preserved lemons and almond sweets. Lucia was not expected to attend the gathering in any formal sense, but she was asked to assist with the music, a task she performed willingly, slipping into the background with quiet grace. The night of the masquerade, she stood near the musicians at the back of the grand salon, her gown a simple creation in pale blue silk, borrowed from Bianca and altered to fit. Her mask, ivory lace stiffened with wax, concealed the upper half of her face. Her hair was pinned up in soft waves, with a single blue ribbon at the nape of her neck. She kept her eyes lowered, noting only the shapes and voices. Men in plumed hats, women in gowns of silk and damask, the sound of laughter amplified by marble and candle. The scent of beeswax, water thickened the air. He entered not with fanfare, but dressed in the rich burgundy tunic of a Roman general, his mask carved in bronze to mimic the heroic faces of ancient statues. Prince Alessio moved through the crowd with effortless command. Guests greeted him with deference, heads turned in his wake. Lucia froze, her breath halting. He had not recognized her. Of course he hadn't. Not here, not among all this artifice. She was no longer the girl in a faded apron, her hands calloused from washing linen. Still, her heart thudded painfully, as if the wound of that day in the village had reopened. He passed near her once, speaking to a pair of ladies in embroidered gowns. But later, as the crowd thinned toward the garden, he stepped through the open doors and paused. Lucia followed instinctively, needing air. The garden was silvered by moonlight, the air cool against her bare neck. The breeze carried the scent of lemon blossoms and sea spray. She lingered near the balustrade, hands pressed to the stone, listening to the music drifting faintly from inside. "You're not dancing," a voice said. She turned. He stood behind her, his mask still on, but his voice unmistakable. "I'm not meant to," she said evenly. "Strange," he murmured. "You seem made for it." His tone wasn't flirtatious. It was thoughtful, curious. She didn't respond. "I don't believe I've seen you before," he added, "and I would remember. I don't often attend such gatherings. You don't sound like a Neapolitan." "I'm not." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party softening behind them. "Do you live here?" he asked. "I serve the household," she said carefully. "As a companion." "To Bianca?" She nodded. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have an air of contradiction." "How so?" "You seem very much at ease, yet very far away." Lucia held his gaze. "I've had practice." He didn't ask for her name. Something in her tone warned him away from it, but the way he looked at her, studying, uncertain, unsettled her deeply. She dipped her head. "I should go back in." He stepped aside, but his voice followed her. "It was unexpectedly pleasant, speaking with you." She walked back into the salon, her heart a riot beneath her bodice. That night, long after the guests had retired and the candles had guttered low, Lucia walked the upper corridor near the gallery. The moon shone through the arched windows, casting light across the tiled floor. Her slippers made no sound. She stopped when she heard voices. A door stood slightly ajar, the glow of lamplight spilling into the hall. It was Alessio's voice, low but clear. "I've done what's expected of me my entire life, Agnese, but lately I can't stop thinking about her. A girl I saw once in a village we were ordered to clear for a naval project. I was sent to oversee the evictions. She said one thing to me, just one, but it haunts me. I don't even know her name." Donna Agnese's voice was soft. "What did she say?" "You have no idea what you've done." Lucia felt her breath catch. "She didn't scream or protest," Alessio continued. "She just looked at me as if I were something beneath her, something unworthy." He let out a quiet laugh, bitter and ashamed. "I've seen thousands of faces. Hers won't leave me." Lucia stepped back from the door, her pulse racing, her hands cold despite the warmth of the corridor. The following morning, Donna Agnese summoned her with a smile and said, "Lucia, I'd like you to accompany Alessio and Bianca to the chapel this afternoon." The morning of the chapel outing arrived cloudless and bright, the air heavy with the perfume of lemon blossoms. From the window of her chamber, Lucia could see the carriage being readied at the foot of the drive, horses shifting impatiently, their manes braided in ribbons of pale blue. Somewhere in the courtyard, Bianca's laughter carried, a delicate sound, like wind playing over glass. Lucia adjusted the ties of her bodice with steady fingers, though her heart was anything but. Her gown was one of Bianca's, a light wool in sage green, the sleeves trimmed with faded lace. It smelled faintly of lavender, a detail that might have calmed her if not for the knowledge that Prince Alessio would be riding beside them. He had haunted her dreams in the nights since the masquerade, not in tormenting visions, but in bewildering fragments, his voice low and uncertain, the line of his jaw in the garden light, the moment he'd spoken to Agnese without knowing she was listening. When she stepped into the courtyard, she found Alessio already waiting. He wore a riding coat of dark navy and a cravat pinned with a small sapphire, nothing ostentatious, but unmistakably expensive. Bianca, seated beside him in the open carriage, beamed at Lucia and waved her handkerchief. "I saved you the good side," she teased gently. Lucia climbed in without hesitation and took the place beside Bianca, facing Alessio directly. Their knees nearly touched. She kept her posture straight, her gaze trained on the landscape that slipped past them as the horses trotted forward. It was Alessio who broke the silence first. "You speak Latin," he said, watching her with calm interest. "I heard you correct Bianca's pronunciation the other day." Lucia's brows lifted slightly. "Only what I was taught. My mother was particular about certain things. Was she a governess? No. She looked at him fully then, her expression unreadable. She never explained what she was, only what I must not become. Alessio gave a small nod, as though he understood more than he let on. They lapsed into quiet again. The road narrowed as it wound between olive trees, the silver leaves flickering in the breeze. "I owe you an apology," he said abruptly. Lucia turned to him, wary. For what exactly? For the masquerade. I shouldn't have approached you in the garden. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't. His gaze held hers. You left in a hurry. Perhaps I was needed elsewhere. Or perhaps, he said quietly, you didn't trust yourself to stay. A flush rose along her collarbone, but she did not look away. I've been told, he added, that I have a talent for making people feel judged. You do it with great efficiency. Alessio gave a dry smile. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in weeks. Lucia studied him for a moment, her wariness shifting into something more reflective. There were lines of fatigue at the corners of his eyes, barely visible but present. The careful polish of his attire could not mask the unease beneath it. At the chapel, the air inside was cool and shadowed. Candles flickered in iron sconces along the walls, and the scent of incense lingered from the morning's mass. Bianca knelt at the front to light a votive. Lucia moved to follow her, but Alessio caught her wrist with a gentle touch. Wait. Their eyes met. His fingers loosened but did not fall away. I don't know who you are, he said softly, but I know what you are. Lucia's voice was calm. And what's that? Someone who sees me too clearly. She pulled her hand free, her skin tingling from the contact. You should be more careful, Your Highness. That sort of clarity can become dangerous. Outside, the sunlight poured over the stone steps. Bianca emerged with a ribbon of wax clinging to her fingers and a look of serene contentment. It's too lovely a day to go home already, she declared. Let's walk a bit. The garden path along the cliffs is still shaded. They strolled together beneath the shade of pine and myrtle. The wind teased loose tendrils of Lucia's hair, and she reached up to tuck them behind her ear. Alessio watched the movement as if it were a line of poetry. The conversation turned light, snippets of music, a comment on the design of a stained glass window, a shared laugh over one of Bianca's more dramatic recollections. But beneath each word, something trembled. A thread pulled taut between them. By the time they returned to the villa, something between them had shifted. Nothing spoken, nothing declared, but something undeniable. The next afternoon, guests from Naples arrived for a garden gathering, friends of Donna Agnese, lingering after the masquerade. Among them was Contessa Evelina Trissino, a woman of striking poise and a reputation sharpened by ambition. Her gown was chartreuse silk, her fan ivory lace tipped with silver. She greeted Alessio with the easy familiarity of someone who had long imagined herself standing beside him. Lucia kept to the edges of the gathering, seated near Bianca, weaving small blooms into a chain. But she felt Evelina's gaze on her, felt it like sunlight through glass, pinpoint and hot. Later, while sipping lemon cordial beneath the arbor, Evelina let her voice drift just loud enough to carry. There's something charming about these country companions, she said to a nearby gentleman, her tone light, her smile edged. One forgets they weren't born to this sort of ease. They mimic refinement so well, but eventually the cracks show. The gentleman made a sound of polite confusion. Evelina waved her fan. Accent, posture, the way one lifts a glass, it all tells a story, even when the mouth doesn't. Lucia stiffened. She felt heat crawl up her throat, not from shame but fury. She rose quietly, not trusting her voice, and turned to go. But Alessio stepped into her path. His face was unreadable. Is there something you should tell me? Lucia froze. She seems to think you're someone you're not, he said, and I'm starting to wonder if she's right. Her fingers clenched at her sides. And if I were someone else, what difference would it make? I don't know yet. She looked past him, toward the orchard, her breath catching. I won't explain myself in front of them. You'd rather let them believe the worst? I'd rather not perform for your amusement. With that, she turned and walked away, her steps precise despite the tremor in her hands. Alessio watched her go, his jaw tight, his breath shallow. Then he turned and left the gathering altogether, striding back into the villa. The library stood silent and cool, dust motes drifting through beams of late light. He moved with purpose to the shelf that held estate records and archives. His fingers ran along the spines until he found a ledger bound in cracked leather, an account book nearly 2 decades old. He turned the pages slowly. Names, wages, holdings, servants dismissed. Tenants listed. There. Bartolini, Giovanna, companion to Signora Rosa Marina, dismissed 1672. Referred to as of uncertain origin, possibly nobility in exile. Daughter, Lucia. Alessio stared at the ink until the lines blurred, his stomach hollow. He closed the ledger with a sharp snap and pressed his palm against the cover, knowing with sickening clarity who she was. The drawing rooms of Villa Rosa Marina, once softened by the rustle of silk and the fragrance of lemons, had grown taut with the weight of whispers. They slipped like threads through arched doorways and along marble corridors, gathering with every passing hour. It had taken less than a day for the murmurs to spread. Lucia, the quiet companion, was not who she appeared to be. Names were not spoken directly. They were implied. Her accent, someone remarked, had a formality that no servant girl possessed. Her posture was too practiced, her silences too deliberate. The air of gentility that clung to her now worked against her, transformed into something dangerous, an elegance out of place, a mystery that asked to be unraveled. And Contessa Evelina Trissino had every intention of unraveling it. She moved through the villa with the poise of someone convinced of her triumph. In her eyes, Lucia's supposed deception was not only an affront, it was an opportunity. The final dinner of the week, held beneath the vaulted ceiling of the great dining hall, offered the perfect stage. Guests from Naples, still lingering after the masquerade and garden gathering, filled the long table. Their laughter rang hollow beneath the glint of chandeliers. Silver clinked gently against porcelain. Wine flowed freely. And at the far end of the table, beneath the painted cherubs of the coffered ceiling, sat Lucia, flanked by Bianca and Donna Agnese. Lucia's gown was a modest dove-gray silk, the sleeves gathered at her wrists, her hair pinned with the same care as always. But her eyes were wary. She felt the weight of attention on her, veiled though it was. Glances darted and fell away. Conversations shifted as she passed. A glance from Alessio at the opposite end of the table met hers only briefly, steady, unreadable but no longer distant. It was Evelina who broke the stillness. "Forgive me," she said, her voice slicing through the hum of conversation like a knife through silk. "But it occurs to me that in all our cheerful hours together, we've somehow never been introduced to our gracious companion. Such a quiet presence, and yet—" She smiled, folding her hands atop the tablecloth. "So very fascinating." The room hushed with the weight of expectation. Forks paused mid-air, wineglasses tilted, then stilled. Lucia did not move. Her pulse thrummed in her throat, but her chin remained high. Donna Agnese lifted her head slowly. "Lucia's presence in my household is not for public dissection." "Oh, I mean no harm," Evelina continued, tilting her head with mock innocence. "I only wondered how she came to be here. One hears things, after all. Names, former places of residence. Connections to evicted lands." Alessio's glass halted halfway to his lips. Lucia's breath was shallow. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence lengthened, unbearable. "Surely," Evelina added, "if there's nothing to conceal, there's no reason not to tell us. Who are your people, my dear? Who claimed you before you claimed this place?" A few at the table murmured softly. A few leaned forward. Lucia stood, her napkin falling to the floor. Her voice, when it came, was steady but low. "You presume the right to demand what was never yours to know." "She presumes nothing," came Alessio's voice, firm, low, and clear enough to quiet every whisper. He rose slowly, his chair scraping back against the stone floor. All eyes turned to him as he stepped away from the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair, the other at his side. "You want to know who she is?" he said, looking at Evelina, and then the room at large. "She's the woman I once evicted, by my hand, my seal, my signature. I carried out an order, believing it routine, and in doing so, I forced her from her home. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She looked me in the eye and told me the truth, that I had no idea what I'd done." His words landed with the weight of something immovable. He turned to face Lucia fully. "I had no idea," he said, "that I had taken shelter from someone who deserved dignity more than anyone at this table. That I had dismissed a woman whose strength is greater than any title, whose silence speaks more than a room full of names." Evelina began to rise, but Alessio raised a hand to silence her. "She is Lucia Bartolini, daughter of Giovanna Bartolini, once a companion to this very household, and before that, daughter to a family of noble blood fallen to ruin. If she bears herself with the grace of a lady, it's because she was raised by one. If she speaks with poise, it's because no amount of hardship could rob her of it." A hush, profound and electric, stretched through the hall. "Any shame here," he added, "does not belong to her. It belongs to those who would question her worth simply because she was born into silence instead of splendor." Donna Agnese stood beside her chair. "I vouch for Lucia, with my name and house. She is welcome here." A ripple moved down the table, nods, murmured assent, eyes lowered in embarrassment. Evelina sat back, her mouth tight. When the dinner resumed, the mood had shifted. Conversation returned, but it did not touch Lucia again. She sat, barely breathing, her hands cool and still against her lap. She did not look at Alessio, but she felt his gaze. Later, long after the candles had burned low and the guests had retired to their rooms or the terrace, she walked alone through the quiet hallway, the stone floor cool beneath her slippers. The door to the gallery was ajar. Inside, the moonlight pooled over the tiled floor. He was there, standing near the open window. Lucia stopped just inside the threshold. Neither spoke. He turned slowly, and for the first time his expression held no guarded edges. "I meant every word." She nodded once. "I know. I should have seen it," he said. "From the first moment. I should have remembered your face. I did, but I didn't let myself believe it." "You weren't meant to remember," she said quietly. "Not someone like me." "That isn't true." Lucia stepped closer, until the sound of the sea beneath them became the only noise between words. "I've lived too long with silence," she said. "I wore it like armor. But you—" She stopped, her voice thick. "You broke through it, and I hated you for it." He exhaled slowly. "I hated myself first." She looked up at him. "I don't know what to feel now, but I know what I see. And I see a man trying to be something no one in his world ever taught him to be." His throat worked. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, only the chance to deserve it. And what would you do with that chance?" "Anything you asked," he said. "Walk away from all of it. From court. From power. From every lie that has kept me bound. I would leave it behind." She stared at him, her heart beating so hard it hurt. "And what would I be to you then?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "Not as a prince, as a man who chooses you." Lucia's voice was barely audible. "Then you should know. I'll stand beside you. But your father won't yield." Alessio's reply was low, firm and unshaken. "Then let him come." The morning they left for Naples, the wind was calm over the hills of Rosa Marina, the sea a mirror of soft pewter beneath a pearled sky. Lucia stood beside the carriage, her hands folded at her waist, her expression composed but quiet with thought. A cluster of jasmine had begun to bloom along the garden wall, the scent drifting between her and Donna Agnese, who stood nearby with a shawl pulled tightly across her shoulders. "You do not need my permission, child," Agnese said gently. "But you have it all the same. You always had it." Lucia turned to her. "You have given me more than shelter." Agnese gave a wry smile. "I only gave you what your mother would have. The rest you've taken with your own strength." They embraced briefly. When Alessio emerged from the villa, in a dark traveling coat, Agnese inclined her head toward him in the dignified fashion of her generation. He bowed to her in return, but his eyes found Lucia immediately. He offered his hand, and she placed hers in his without hesitation. They rode together in silence for a long stretch of the journey, the road winding through the ochre hills and cypress groves, passing vineyards just beginning to green. Naples rose from the coastline like a dream remembered. Sunlit domes, narrow streets, rooftops crowded like feathers in a wing. The palace loomed near the city's heart, its gates wrought of iron and dignity. As the carriage entered the courtyard, servants stepped aside with curious glances, unsure whether to bow. Inside, the halls smelled of beeswax and marble dust, the air colder than memory. Lucia remained in the antechamber as agreed, while Alessio went alone to face his father. The Duke of Calderari waited in a private audience chamber lined with maps and heirlooms, things Alessio had once admired as a child and later come to despise. The man behind the desk was tall, composed, with silver-streaked hair and a bearing of inflexible pride. He did not rise when Alessio entered. "I was told you were returning," the Duke said, "though I hadn't expected you would come bearing scandal." Alessio met his gaze without hesitation. "I come with truth, not scandal." "Truth." The Duke leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You arrive here to declare your intention to wed a woman of questionable origin, tied to the very peasantry you were meant to govern." "She is not questionable," Alessio said quietly. "Her name is Lucia Bartolini. Her mother served this house. Her family on her mother's side bore noble blood before it was stripped by time and silence. And if I am to carry the Calderari name forward, I will do so beside her, or not at all." The Duke's expression did not flicker. "You would renounce your inheritance, your future. I would renounce a future built on silence and cowardice. Do you think your romantic gesture will make you a hero among the people?" The Duke's voice sharpened. "They'll remember you not as noble, but as mad. I don't require their approval, or yours." A long silence passed between them, stretched tight as a bowstring. The Duke stood at last and crossed to the window. Outside, the garden bloomed in orderly precision, trimmed hedges and roses clipped to obedience. "You are no longer a child," he said finally, "and I can see that I can no longer treat you as one." Alessio said nothing. The Duke turned. "If I cast you out entirely, the scandal will stain this house more than your rebellion ever could. So I offer you this. You will not marry her as the heir to Calderari, but as a man of your own choosing. I will grant you a modest estate in the southern province. You will be removed from the line of succession. You will live without title, and you will not return." Alessio's voice was steady. "I accept." The Duke inclined his head, the gesture more command than farewell. "Then go." He did. Lucia was waiting in the corridor, her eyes searching his face. He offered no words, only his hand. She took it, and they walked out of the palace together. By the time they returned to Villa Rosamarina, the news had begun to trickle through the polite circles of Naples like spring water down stone. Prince Alessio de Calderari had renounced his inheritance to marry a former servant's daughter. The words were spoken with disdain by some, amusement by others, but a few, quietly, spoke them with admiration. Not for the scandal, but for the courage it required. Donna Agnese welcomed them back without ceremony, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But in the days that followed, a quiet flurry of preparations began. Seamstresses arrived with samples of silk. The chapel was swept and polished. Invitations were sent, not to lords and ladies of rank, but to the few who mattered: friends, loyal staff, Bianca, and those who had seen Lucia not as a mystery, but as herself. The wedding day dawned clear and windless, the sky brushed in pale gold. Lucia dressed in silence, her gown a soft ivory silk, the sleeves narrow, the bodice unadorned. Her hair was pinned in simple waves, with a single pearl comb tucked above her ear. She wore no veil. Donna Agnese entered her chamber just before the bells began to ring. "Your mother," she said, smoothing a wrinkle at Lucia's sleeve, "would have been so proud." Lucia pressed her hand over Agnes's. "I carry her with me." In the garden beneath the olive trees, white chairs had been arranged in a crescent facing the sea. A small altar stood beneath a garland of laurel and jasmine. Alessio waited, dressed in a dark suit that bore no crest, no gold thread, no house emblem. He was no longer a prince in title, but he had never stood taller. When Lucia stepped into the garden, the chapel bells began to chime. Her steps were measured, but not slow. Her head was high. The sea behind Alessio shimmered like glass. The wind stirred her skirts and whispered through the trees as she reached his side and placed her hand in his. The ceremony was brief, spoken in the soft Latin of the old rites. Vows exchanged not in grandeur, but in clarity. When Alessio spoke her name, it was with reverence. When she spoke his, it was with peace. There was no fanfare, no orchestra. Only the waves, the wind, and the sound of Bianca crying quietly into her handkerchief beside Agnese. When the words were said and the rings exchanged, Alessio leaned forward and pressed a kiss to Lucia's lips, light, steady, and certain. Later that evening, as twilight wrapped itself over the hills, they walked together barefoot along the shore, their shoes left behind on the warm sand. The water lapped at their ankles, and the last of the sunlight painted their shadows long across the earth. Lucia's hand was wrapped in his. She said nothing for a long time, letting the rhythm of the sea fill the silence between them. Then, quietly, he said, "I understand now." She turned to him, her smile soft, the wind tugging at the hem of her gown. "So do I. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.